Okay, folks. Today we're talking with Pastor Darren Neal. He is president of the Lowndes, Valdosta N.A.A.C.P. Because of a scheduling conflict, he wasn't able to join us the other night when we chatted with the concerned clergy, really about two different things. One of them is about the case of Antonio Smith, and the other is about the mayor of Valdosta's kind of inflammatory commentary on his conservative talk radio show, and also how he uses that kind of talk radio show to speak for Valdosta and speak as the mayor. So Pastor Neal, thank you for making time. I'm sorry you couldn't join us the other night, but I'm glad that you made time today and could make time, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, I am proud to be here. I'm proud to be with you and proud to see what you're doing. So I thank God for you.
Yeah, likewise. Can you just tell me a little bit about kind of the history of the N.A.A.C.P here and how you got involved in it?
Well, I came here originally 15 years ago with CSX Railroad as a district manager, locomotive engineer, and conductor. And originally my plans and the employment plan and the company's plan was to send me here for a year and to leave. But for some reason or another, my heart went out to the people of the city. I saw some of the same disenfranchisements that we see today that went on 15 years ago. And I made a conscious choice to stay. I made the choice to stay here in Valdosta in spite of the fact that it's not my home. I'm from South Carolina. I moved from the Atlanta area. So I gave up a lot of different amenities to come here to a location that's very remote, very rural area. But the pulse of the people was in my heart. And I saw some things that I just thought were wrong, out of the way. I began to pastor a church, and I was sought after at some point to be a part of the N.A.A.C.P.
Gotcha.
The chapter here was, it had started, restarted, and had some difficulties getting started and staying and maintaining its status. Somewhere about 4 years ago, I was asked to take on the role of vice president, and I was kind of working as the vice president of the SCLC and the chapter here at the same time, and the People's Tribunal. When the black contractors fight, and I don't really like to say black contractors fight, it was a Valdosta fight. It was a Valdosta contractors fight. When that took flight, I was sought after to be the president to try to revamp the organization because it was very much needed. Yeah. And this past year and a half, I've been the president for about a year and a half now, going on 2 years. And I've sought to try to revamp the organization and to make it the powerhouse organization that it is everywhere else. Mainly, you will see in these smaller towns, the chapters don't seem to flourish as well. But Valdosta is really a very important city in the state of Georgia, a lot more so than many make out and understand. It maintains a great voter base, and it's the seat of South Georgia, and it needs this organization. Many are misunderstood about N.A.A.C.P. They think that it's an organization that is just for African Americans, and it's so not. It is an organization that's centered around African Americans from its origin, but it's about the equality and justice and fight against the injustices for all people, mainly people of color, because typically in America, those that are not of color tend to have an advantage. So that's the reason the organization exists. And today, I'm very proud of the organization and the work that we've done here in the community. We've been kind of non-existent for the past 4 or 5 years, but I'm very proud of the organization and what we're doing right now to aid the public. I'm proud to be at the forefront of leading quite a few investigations to knock out some of the injustices that are occurring.
Gotcha. How did y'all become aware of the Antonio Smith incident?
We became aware of the incident through Chief Manahan. Somewhere, I want to say around June, we were alerted to the incident, and she called our agency in to view the body cam. I have a very intimate relationship with the chief. I really think highly of her, think highly of the job that she's doing, and I was very proud that she'd followed the previous chief in bringing in civil rights agencies to see these body cams. I was very impressed with that. She called us in to view the body cams, and I will kind of state out there that she gave me an opportunity to see all versions of the body cams, which typically does not happen with a police agency. She was pretty open about it. So I was very proud of that. And she called us in to view the cams.
Yeah. Can I be a little, I guess I just want to get a timeline. So this happened like in February, right?
Yes.
She called you in. Did she call you in after the litigation, or was it preemptive, or kind of to get your input on what had happened, or what was that conversation like?
It was really more so to get my input. I have worked with her on other incidents, other cases in which we seek to find a common ground. Unlike many of my predecessors, I do not come as a battering ram or with an adversarial approach, or an approach that I'm all right and everyone else is all wrong. I came to her on many other occasions with different situations where we've had a common ground to seek out the right way of handling things. And so she gave me that same courtesy when this case came about. I think what had happened was the attorney approached her and they had received some paperwork, and she called me up to ask me for some advice as to first to show me some footage and to get my approach on my take on what I thought I saw. And we both kind of troubleshot how we should handle it.
Gotcha. Well, and you've served as a chaplain, right, for the Valdosta Police Department. And am I remembering correctly, though, you were also in law enforcement at one point in time?
Yes, I was. I was a police officer in Charleston, South Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina, Orangeburg area, Bowman, and a part of the Florence Police Department.
Gotcha. So I'm assuming she showed you the footage. Can you talk about what you told her? I know there's pending litigation, but I don't think y'all are in the middle of it, are you?
Well, I can be subpoenaed, and I look to be subpoenaed at some point. I believe that it probably will be. I will tell you this much. I know, at least I have a strong familiarity with Lieutenant Wheeler, and I've served under him. I make no bones about it. I think very highly of him. I'm very shocked at the incident in which it occurred and how it occurred. And as I explained to her, I gave her what I felt was another police officer's viewpoint. At the same time, I also advised her that I lead a civil rights agency and that I can't let my personal opinion cloud what I saw. Yeah. That I have to look at this incident through the lens and the eyes of the people that will watch and view this video, as well as Antonio Smith's eyes. What did Antonio Smith think? What did he see? And in spite of what I would have done, and I will admit that I would have definitely handled that situation way differently than he had done so. What I chalked it up to is that maybe he had a bad day. It was a bonehead move. It was an indiscretion. Honestly, I just don't know what he was thinking. It was just not the normal route that police officers use to handle a situation such as that. Mr. Smith was not aggressive. He was animated. But we have a previous knowledge of Mr. Smith. I have a previous knowledge of Mr. Smith. I've been around him on scene before with the PD. He was no more animated then than he was in the past. So it did not give me room from watching the video to think that it warranted any type of force to be used against him.
Yeah. Have you seen their official account of what happened, Officer Wheeler's and Officer Henry's? I think I sent it to you and everybody, but I don't know if you had a chance to read it.
Yes, I disagree with the way that they stated that it happened. The way they wrote the incident was to lean in the favor of Lieutenant Wheeler. Again, while I think very highly of Lieutenant Wheeler, I have also the utmost of respect for Mr. Smith because he is a citizen and because he is a member of the population of Valdosta, Georgia. And despite what his mental capacity may be, he deserves the same and the utmost of care that any other person would have gotten. I did not necessarily agree with the way they wrote it because it did not appear to coincide with the video. One of the things that I saw, and I wrote this in the letter that I wrote to them, was that I believe that Officer Wheeler's sole actions created the atmosphere that resulted in his wrist being broken. Had he not performed that act, we would not be having this podcast right now.
Yeah. We might be for other stuff. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and just so folks know, you know, we've gotten the document, those officers' account. There were actually 4 different reports, and the language that Officer Wheeler and Officer Henry and the 2 other officers used was that Officer Wheeler rolled him to the ground, not physically picked him up and slammed him to the ground. It's kind of what we're talking about. And the language, right, you're talking about.
We saw 2 different things. What I saw Officer Wheeler approach him from behind.
Right.
And as I explained to the chief when I initially saw the video, my initial reaction to the video was a knee-jerk reaction. And I stated to her, I understand why he snuck up behind Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith has on occasion been aggressive on scene, and he's not new to the police department, and he's not new. I'm not going to paint him as a saint. He's not new to the police department, and he has had other issues with the police. And I can understand him approaching him from behind so as to gain the advantage. Every police officer, citizens will not see it this way, but a police officer has his own safety to worry about as well.
And the safety of other officers.
The safety of all the other officers on the scene. And believe it or not, just the appearance of another police officer on scene agitates a subject that's out with a single police officer. From my experience, I've been on scene with a single subject and several other officers approach, and that agitates the subject. So I can understand that. But when Lieutenant Wheeler approached him from behind, he himself already had him restrained. He wrapped his arm around his waist, grabbed his right wrist, and then he stated, place your hands behind your back. Well, at the time in which he stated that, you already had him restrained. So technically, what should have occurred is he should have grabbed both wrists and bring both arms behind his back. That is the proper technique for applying handcuffs. And if he holds him, then the other officer should have assisted in the apprehension, and it would not have required him to lift him in the air and slam him to the ground, because he didn't roll him to the ground. He lifted him in the air and slammed him to the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, do we need to watch the footage? Cause it's kind of traumatic to watch. I mean,
we really don't have to. I think much of the public has seen a great video. It's really not necessary. I think where we're headed here in this conversation is, were his actions egregious, and were his actions the sole cause of the incident? And what should be the outcome of this situation? Where should we go from here?
Yeah.
I think, again, we're here for 2 reasons today. One, to talk about the Antonio Smith case, and one, to talk about the mayor.
Yeah.
Again, the mayor's inflammatory statements seem to ignite the city when he opens his mouth. Very similar to his cohort and friend, Donald Trump. Yeah. I think that the mayor takes a page from the Donald Trump playbook when he says inflammatory things to incite his voter base. The mayor made a comment that nothing should happen. And I think had he not made that statement, we would not be where we are with the public at unrest, because I've advised the chief on several occasions that there are some quiet splinter groups that are sitting quietly waiting to see what the outcome of this case is. And we could very much have a Ferguson or a Minnesota or even a Capitol situation should the situation not be taken care of properly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other thing I thought a lot about, I've never been in law enforcement, but I've been in mental health. I worked in a private psychiatric hospital doing intake, right? So I would assess people, and I worked for 5 years. And then I worked for a local nonprofit crisis center. And for me, it brought up the issue because I think, and I'm not, we haven't really talked about defunding the police and what that means, but people I know in other cities are talking about, and law enforcement, a lot of people I don't think go in law enforcement to be mental health people, right? But when I saw kind of Mr. Smith's situation, I was thinking, what are the skills to de-escalate, right? And I've seen officers that are really skilled at it, right, in terms of not making a bad situation worse. But it's got to be tough to be in the field and be able to make that call. But the other thing I've reached out to, and I said this to the concerned clergy's group, a couple of things. I reached out to Chief Manahan just to ask a couple of questions, whether Officer Wheeler was disciplined. And, we had gotten word through the city that he was actually promoted. I mean, did the NAACP hear that as well? And what we were told by the city is he was promoted anyway because he was already in the promotion process. At the time, I think he was a sergeant.
In actuality, we didn't find out that he'd been promoted until the same time we found out about the incident. We had no knowledge of the incident up until, and I have a strong connection to the police department, and it had not even been revealed to me. The same with his promotion. I did not know about his promotion. And
so he was promoted.
I found out I found out the exact same day that she showed us the video.
Okay. Because yes, I know you referenced him as lieutenant, and she wouldn't confirm either one for me. She said that because of the pending litigation that she didn't want to talk about either of those two things.
Yeah, he was a sergeant, and he was promoted in the last batch of promotions.
Gotcha.
And I'll be the first to tell you, with the previous chief, the ball kind of got tossed around as to who actually promoted him, because I actually advocated that he be promoted in the last batch. There are a lot of police officers that have this experience level. You mentioned something previously, the skills to de-escalate. I have to tell you, I'm extremely shocked. I really am, because he is probably one of the best at de-escalation. He's very skilled, and I don't want to sit here and falsely paint a picture that's not factual. Yeah. I had trouble watching the video, one, because of the aggressiveness, but two, seeing that it was him, because this is the same officer that just gave mouth to mouth, to two Black citizens, male and female, who rescued on two different occasions, two people. And that's just so polar opposite to what I saw. Yeah. As well as the fact that I've been on scene with him when he has just de-escalated a situation verbally without putting hands on. So I had to assume something was going on with him, maybe it was a bad, whatever it was, that one incident, we cannot ignore that one incident, that one action created this entire situation. We cannot.
Which kind of leads us into the mayor in a way, right? Because my understanding is that the mayor was slow to address the concerns that folks had. And, I think the other thing is this is during the time of George Floyd, right? It's in the kind of public consciousness that, and police brutality among folks of color is problematic, right? And, it's funny because, one of the founders of the NAACP is W.E.B. Du Bois. And I remember reading his biography, and in 1910 or 1920, because he was born like in 1865, he lived such a really long time. But in 1910, he's talking about police brutality as it pertains to Black folks. Like, so we have this American history of it, right? But then we have, Mayor Matheson, because my understanding is he really didn't say anything until kind of pushed to. And I know a lot of folks weren't satisfied with his response. I mean, is that fair to say?
Well, it's even more than fair to say. I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm being restrained in my stating this. I'm just downright outraged at the mayor's response, because he lied. In his statement, he stated that the NAACP was aligned with him on his decision that nothing happened to Officer Wheeler. We've never spoken to Mayor Matheson. I have yet to have FaceTime with Mayor Matheson since the night of the debate. The last time I talked to Mayor Matheson was
This
when
is the mayoral debate.
Mayoral debate at Serenity Church, the night that he and Kevin Bussey and J.D. Rice were on stage together, was the last time that I've talked to Matheson.
So that's a good year and a half ago, I guess, or more, right?
He put in the newspaper, as well as on a video, that, and he says it in such a very racy way, that NAACP, is aligned with him, or that NAACP is with him. We're not with him. We haven't spoken to him to be with him. We are, just like you, attempting to get FaceTime with him, and he does not respond.
Yeah. So what I've seen, and maybe because I haven't seen the footage you're talking about, what he aligned with kind of city council made a little video that got released. And I want to say it was in several months after both the incident happened and the litigation started, but where he quoted a lot of statistics in terms of use of force among Valdosta police, and kind of to demonstrate it's not a problem. And, and he was a good politician in the sense of saying, I support the police, but we want to make sure citizens feel safe as well. But that was pretty much it. So in terms of when did he make the statement that implicated the NAACP?
Several days after the videos were placed out. He
Online.
did an article with the Valdosta Daily Times, a news article, and it had a video attached to it. And his news article stated, and it was blurred. In that article, you'll see he wrote that NAACP, and then it's blurred, and then he goes on to allege that we support him and are aligned with him. We haven't spoken to him.
Gotcha. So you were there at the debates. Did the issue of him, I mean, I don't mean to change subjects, but since you were there and I wasn't, and this relates to something the Valdosta Daily Times said, and I confirmed it with them, but it's my understanding when he was campaigning, he didn't do his talk show. Did the issue of him being a conservative pundit ever come up in any of the discussions as he ran or in those debates that you can recall?
Yes, it did, because I was also the moderator and I also made all the questions. So yes, it did. I was the moderator for the debate. Yeah. And one of the things that I posed to him was the fact that as the mayor of Valdosta, regardless of what his political background was, he was to be the mayor of a total city made up of many people, and that the city had been somewhat disenfranchised in that small emerging businesses were overlooked, typically people of color. The LGBTQ community had been overlooked, women had been overlooked. Basically, I wanted to get his take on how he would merge all of these different groups into one pile. The mayor's response, the majority of his response most of the night was, I'm going to make sure that when I'm mayor, there are going to be plenty of jobs, that the commerce will increase, that businesses will flourish. It was a page from the Donald Trump playbook. Yeah. A bunch of promises that really didn't have a plan. The thing that I really was impressed with Kevin Bussey and J.D. Rice both was that they had a plan. J.D. had a plan. He spoke of 1 cent tax. He spoke of hotel taxes. He spoke of different taxes to specific taxes. Yeah. He had a specific plan that had a projected outcome and figures that went with it, him and Bussey both. The mayor simply stood up, made promises, and has yet to keep those promises.
Yeah, I have no idea what his policy is or what his vision is, Well, and again, I just want to go back to the fact that my struggle with the situation is, as someone who's lived here probably 45 years, is that, he's owned or participated in right-wing radio for 19 years. Currently, one of the pundits on his current talk station is Glenn Beck, who has said a number of racist things, including making kind of conspiratorial commentary, claiming that President Barack Obama was racist against whites. I'm just, I guess, did you ever hear him articulate how he was going to keep his political biases and his business separate from doing what you said, right? I'm going to represent everybody. It's particularly in a predominantly Black city.
Mark, that was what came up. I do my best to not make it an issue of black and white, but there comes a point in time, and that's why I'm proud of you. And I must pause and say I'm extremely proud of you, because you're doing what most people won't do.
I'm just a follower of Jesus, my friend. This is what you're supposed to do.
Mark, that was the word. That was, oh my God, I got goosebumps right now. If you could see my arm, quarter-size goosebumps right now, because you're taking a stand for Jesus when no one else will. It doesn't matter what color you are. If we divide the line between people and say those for Jesus and those that are not for Jesus, that side that's for Jesus will have a mixture, a rainbow of people, and not just all black people, not just all white people, but it'd be a rainbow of people that love the Lord. And so I'm proud of you for doing that. I mean, I'm overjoyed. I'm proud to stand beside you.
Yeah, we're brothers. Yeah, I mean, my thing is, we'll fight over Jesus. We got more denominations out of my tradition than, Carter's got liver pills. But this is one of the things. I mean, I think it's always, again, not to use race about everything, or it's not the only problem, right? So I don't want to come off, I say this before, as my only tool's a hammer and every problem's a nail. But I think one of the things I struggle with, and I said this to Councilman Howard when we chatted, was I see a reluctant, and it feels weird saying this as a white man, but there are all these things that happen at our school board. It's happening today, right? Around the not rehiring a white coach. There's literally a racial discriminatory case. The votes were along racial lines. The votes in the city council for mandatory masks, right? Given people of color or, suffering from COVID in ways white folks aren't. There are all these times where things seem to break down along racial lines. And not only that, when we drive around this damn town, right? We can see dividing lines, right? We can talk about statues on public land. And I think sometimes I'm always at a loss, Brother Neal, because my thing is, how can we solve a problem if we can't name it? Sometimes is how I feel, and I get that it's. I wonder for Black folks here that do want to build cross-racial coalitions, right? Because white folks are suffering too in many ways, from COVID, from job displacement, right? We got our issues as well. And at the same time, having lived here for 45 years, I've seen the white flight, right? I mean, all the developments on the north end of town, the south, from basically, I would say, Gordon Street south-wise, it's just crumbling slowly in some places, right? And in fact, I think even the mayor was quoted in the paper of talking about white flight, and what that's done to town. And I guess it'd be interesting to see what the N.A.A.C.P thinks about this, like, especially this week, given all the repressive voting bills, right? Like, I'm a student of Reverend Barber's, who argues we're kind of in a third Reconstruction. Like, we're in the struggle for the soul of the country, right? And I know my white conservative brothers think they are too. But race is permeating all of that, you know what I mean? And I guess the thing that saddened me as somebody who's been here, we've been before city council multiple times over the years and said, you know what, let's be courageous and talk about this. Let's name it. Let's show the rest of the country. Let's model it. It doesn't have to be, we can't pretend this ain't happening here. We can't pretend that there's not inequality. Why don't we actually do something that the rest of the country seems unable to do or unwilling to do? Let's deal with our past. Let's deal with our present. Let's look at who's hurting and who's hurting the most. Let's build a city that's truly inclusive, one where some communities aren't over policed, right? And some communities aren't policed at all. So I don't know where I'm going with all that, but it's always precarious. And I say that because when the work I do with white folks around racism, as well as patriarchy and any kind of oppression, I would argue it's in our interest to do that. Well, it's not just some, obligatory thing we're doing for folks of color, for gay people. Like, our humanity is damaged when I turn my back on other humans, right? And how, it's like Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I would say white folks ought to be fighting, not, and we're in the same human soup as everybody else. And as the follower of a Palestinian that was fighting the Roman Empire and religious zealots of the day, and trying to teach folks that it ain't about the money, right? It's not about the titles. It's about how we treat one another, and that's the conversation I want to have with the mayor. I'm sure you do too. The conversation I'd love to have with Chief Manahan as well, and that's what all this is about, to me.
I think when it comes to the chief, my honest opinion is she inherited, and I guess because I have somewhat of an more of an inside view and approach of what went on from her previous administration, the previous administration, and one she inherited. She's putting out a lot of fires. If I could just, and when I state that emphatically. She's still putting out fires from 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's a hard juggling act. And this particular incident didn't do anything to help out. I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. I will tell you that one of my advisements to her was to involve the Justice Department, and she did do just that. And I think that that's going to be the best way to show the public that you're taking an active approach to solving this situation, regardless of what your personal opinion is, because I know that her personal opinion differs than the rest of the general public. And of course, being that he's a comrade and she's fought side by side with him, I would expect her to do nothing less than to support him through and through to the end. However, taking that responsibility of deciding what happens to him and placing it in the Justice Department's hand, it can be viewed many different ways. But one of the good things that happens right now, if you notice, Donald Trump's regime is gone, Joe Biden's regime is in, which means that we'll probably have a better chance of a real investigation occurring, an in-depth investigation occurring, and an actual logical outcome. And that
it's over.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't gotten the whole skinny on that. I'm going to have to do some deep diving on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a smart move on her behalf, right? Because if it's a civil rights case, right, it kind of lets the feds deal with it. But yeah, I thought I had told you, like, I want to say I got that from Mark Barber.
Got
that they did look into it, but that the investigation was terminated. Which kind of still raises the question of, you have a seasoned veteran officer who, according to you in the Valdosta Police Department's a really good officer, right? It's got a impeccable record, but hurts a citizen, and the black folks in my life are go, yep, here we go again. I mean, and I don't pretend to have the remedy, right? But if it's true that there was no disciplinary action whatsoever, and then there's actually promotion, right? The image that's put out is hard to swallow, right?
Well, I'm going to tell you what's about to happen. The city's about to set itself up for multiple lawsuits. That's just my personal opinion. And here's why. There were police officers that have done a whole lot less that were fired for their first offense for things that were a whole lot less that were minute. And then there are some police officers that have gotten multiple opportunities to make multiple mistakes and have made some extremely egregious mistakes. Not only were they not fired, but they were allowed to find employment in other smaller cities and elevated to higher positions. We have one police officer that was released, allowed to resign. He went inside of an investigation and lied in the investigation. I mean, it's a Brady violation. Once you lie in an official investigation, it's a Brady violation, which means that you can't, your integrity is now tarnished and you can never be a police officer ever again. You can never try a case. You might be a police officer in work supply, but your arrest powers are gone and your ability to solve crimes are gone. And after this guy was found to be lying and evidence shown that he lied, he's allowed to go find employment, not at one police department, but two police departments, one in which he has a current lawsuit against the second police department after leaving the Valdosta Police Department, and is now a current administrative officer in one of the smaller towns outside of Valdosta. So,
that's one of the beefs of BLM and don't shoot and other folks, right? That folks just hop, skip and jump to new places, right? That don't really vet them or don't seem to be too concerned about past disciplinary action.
Yeah. But, more so than anything, we're looking at, I think to help solve this problem, one of the major things that I think needs to occur is to teach de-escalation tactics. You mentioned officers that are better at it. I'm one of those guys that the entire time I was on the street, I almost never had to draw my weapon. I used an approach that my father taught me. My stepfather was a police officer, and I used to ride with him in a patrol car. And I used to wonder why he never drew his weapon, why he didn't get into foot chases, and why he didn't use a lot of energy like the other police officers did. He used to state to me, if I know the people of my community in which I patrol, I know where they live and I have a personal relationship with them, I don't have to chase them. I know where they are.
And they're not afraid of him.
Not afraid of them. And I have had a couple of police officers tell me that when they get out of their cars, that they're afraid. That in itself is a recipe for disaster. Yeah. One of the things that I was taught in the old way of policing was called community policing.
Yeah.
And I was taught community policing. So I walked on foot, even though I had a patrol car. There was a time frame in which I parked my car and actually walked in the community, spoke with the old ladies. I knew who lived in each house, what time they went to work, what time they got home. And I didn't stop cars, particularly of those that lived in the community, because my job was to protect those people. Yeah. So I particularly was more concerned with those people who I didn't know, those suspicious looking people. And that worked. I did not have to draw my weapon and I did not have to use force because my familiarity with the majority of the people that I encountered gave me the ability to de-escalate situations. I do think that if I was in Lieutenant Willis' shoes, when I approached that scene, the very first thing that I would have done was approach Officer Henry. That's standard protocol across.
Just so folks know, Officer Henry was handling the situation and actually information gathering from Mr. Smith, right?
Exactly. So when you approach, that police officer was not in a defensive stance. He was not agitated. He was fact-finding, gathering, and he was making every attempt to keep Mr. Smith at bay.
Right.
While Mr. Smith is animated, I've seen him a lot more animated in the past, and he was pretty calm compared to what I've seen him. At which time I want to dig into something I think that may interest the public in this particular podcast. I've heard on occasion after occasion that Lieutenant Wheeler did nothing wrong. And if I look at it through the eyes of the public and look at it through the eyes of Mr. Smith, and based on the police department's own policy, it pretty much coincides with the state law. Both the state law and the departmental policies require de-escalation tactics, that force be used only as necessary to affect the outcome or to affect the objective. What was the objective at that particular point? In the mind of Officer Wheeler, and I don't profess to know his mindset, but in the mind of Officer Wheeler, from his own words and his own actions, he thought that that was a felony arrest being made. The objective was to conduct a felony arrest. How do you do that? Based on the policies and based on the state law. You make contact with the subject, and the law states that you can use as much force as necessary to make a lawful arrest, only that amount of force needed to subdue that subject. When you wrapped your arms around that subject and grabbed his right wrist, that was a slight use of force, at which time he was stabilized. He did not resist, and he did not fight back. He simply asked the question, "What are you doing? What's going on?" At that time.
Well, and let's be clear, he didn't see Officer Wheeler come up. Mr. Smith didn't. All he knew was he was now grabbed.
Exactly. So at that point, he's being grabbed by an unknown subject. So the mindset of this, he's not being arrested by the officer that he's on scene with, but he's being grabbed from behind from an unknown subject. At that time, Georgia law protects him. Georgia 308-11 gives him the right to resist an unlawful arrest with as much force as necessary to remove himself from the arrest. And it also, if you look at it from the standpoint of a normal citizen being grabbed from behind by someone he did not see or know, he's being startled. He has at least enough right and responsibility to flee from that area to prevent being grabbed and his life being jeopardized. Now, a police officer has three things that he needs to have in order to use deadly force. He has to have the ability, the opportunity, and the jeopardy. That person needs to have the ability to harm you, place your life in jeopardy, and he has to have the opportunity. All of those three elements were not present. When Lieutenant Wheeler approached the scene, he placed himself and injected himself into the scene. And in most cases, what a supervisor will do is act in a supervisor and administrative role. Whenever a primary officer is on scene first, that primary officer has sole control of the scene, at which time that supervisory officer will stay on the outer skirts and if necessary, when the time comes, so as not to create a critical situation for the officer's safety, he will ask that officer what his intent is.
Yeah. He kind of defers to him, right?
Defers to him. And he will ask, what do you want to do? Are you going to lock him up or not? That's that primary officer's position. If that officer does not agree to arrest him, then there's an alternative approach. There is information that's taken. You run this information to make sure it's not wanted anywhere, and you warn him and you release him, or you may ticket him. At which time,
you for just a second, like if Officer Wheeler, and again, if he would have done all of that, Officer Henry would have had the opportunity to tell him he is not the person with an outstanding warrant.
Exactly.
Right.
That would have been the outcome. And I think after watching,
Smith would have walked off without a broken wrist, and BPD wouldn't be in the middle of the mess, right?
Exactly. So that's the reason why I take the approach that I'm taking right now. The national office of the N.A.A.C.P, as well as the state office of the N.A.A.C.P, has passed down the position that we stand with Antonio Smith, that he had been harmed, and that the Valdosta Police Department does have a responsibility to make him whole, as well as we feel that they are the reason that this incident occurred. And one of the things that we like to see happen is proper training, more training in de-escalation, more training in community policing. And while the nation has its own approach to policing, that does not mean that the Valdosta Police Department has to follow the rest of the nation. The Valdosta Police Department can take its own initiative. What would really make the department look good is if they took the initiative to teach officers the old way of policing, community policing. I'll give you a prime example. And I don't mean to sound condescending in any way or to make it a racial issue. But let me ask the question. What's the number of people stopped in Kinderloo, Stone Creek, in relation to the number of people stopped per night at, say, Orly West, or Hudson Docket, or Brittany Woods, or Park Chase? The numbers are astounding. They're polar opposites. Roadblocks are run on at very often in these neighborhoods that I mentioned in the latter. However, you'll never see a roadblock ran at Stone Creek.
I'll do one better. Country Club Drive. Just sit outside the country club.
Exactly.
On a Friday night.
Here's some things that pose a risk that I think are some things that need to be addressed. If two or three young Black men are standing together on a street corner and they're going to be stopped and asked why they're there. I have seen as many as 8 to 10 pickup trucks, young white teenagers in the parking lot of most of the closed establishments in a roundhouse. And I've even as much as seen underage drinking. And I've called it in and asked for police officers to come to the scene. They've shown up at the scene. No one's ever ticketed, arrested, made to disperse, or most of the time just allowed to continue on as long as they keep it quiet. Yeah. So we're looking at a strong disparity that we cannot ignore. I know that we don't like to talk about these things, but America, and we don't see America, Valdosta must address these issues before it gets out of hand. There is unrest on both sides, and we're looking at a clash if we don't do something to stop it.
Yeah, I've lived in a lot of different places, and I've never lived anywhere where there's more police per capita. And I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in Portland, I've lived in Albuquerque, I've lived in places that have all the problems and challenges, that cities have. And the last time I looked at the FBI, collects and creates the Uniform Crime Report. And if I'm not mistaken, in 2010, which was the latest time they did it, we had one law enforcement official or active officer per 310 people.
Wow.
I mean, I've never lived anywhere where there is the constant police presence, or that can. I told concerned clergy this, and I think the other thing you're bringing up, that I know 5 African-American pastors here who have nice cars, who are middle class, who get pulled over just like poor Black folks do, so the racial profiling issue is real. But I used to work downtown, and an undercover officer pulled a kid over. He's probably 19-year-old African-American in our parking lot. And I think his license had been suspended, but the dude he wasn't armed or anything, but he took off running. Right. And within minutes, there were 13 different vehicles respond to this situation that came out of the woodwork, from every imaginable direction. And I thought a couple of things, and again, I don't want to disrespect law enforcement, but number one, that people didn't have anything better to do that day for 13. It wasn't like he was a big guy armed, or he didn't strike the officer. He's just a kid, right, doing something stupid. And I also that the place I worked was a predominantly Black community, and it's clear that they're there all the time, just kind of waiting to pounce on folks. And most of the officers did not look like the people in the community, And so again, like I can't tell you the number of cities I've lived where that had higher crime rates, right? I mean, and it worries me at times too, to kind of go back to your example of who gets to be a dumb kid making mistakes and who gets criminalized.
Exactly.
You know, because we won't get into mass incarceration. That's a whole other conversation, right? But there is kind of a genocide, in my opinion, going on because we generally criminalize youth of color in ways we don't white kids, even poor white kids. And it's serious, like you said. Can we shift to the mayor for a little bit though? Because we could go down this rabbit hole real far, right?
For a long time. Yes.
Yeah. How did you find out about kind of what the mayor said? And again, we don't necessarily need to play the audio unless you think it'll be useful, but basically, particularly his comments about, and both of us got interviewed about this, but when did you become aware that he had made all these comments about the Democratic efforts to get people out to vote?
Well, I'd actually heard some of his, I like you, you know, I don't think I'd be a good president if I didn't keep my ear to the ground.
Yeah.
So I have every news outlet on my phone, every kind of social media, social outlet. And I started hearing the different comments being made. I'd heard some of his own podcasts as well. And I started inquiring about his Rush Limbaugh type of commentaries.
Yeah.
And then it became apparent that others had heard what I'd heard, because then I saw videos being posted all across Facebook, and then it led me to you. And I think yours was really, really great. And it kind of struck my attention because it was very well put together, well as it very, very well dissected his different statements. I have software to help kind of elevate and clear up some of what he said. And so I took it and spent some time that night really dissecting and listening to what he was stating. And I got to tell you, and this may sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. I was literally moved to tears. Literally moved to tears. Now, you think about this. We're talking roughly 47 years ago. 47 years, if I'm not mistaken. The 24th Amendment was put in place to stop poll taxes. I'm 51 years old. 47 years ago, somebody said it's unfair to put all these different roadblocks in place to prevent a citizen with the right to vote.
Yeah.
The mayor's response is, and he agreed with another citizen who pretty much says he doesn't care what anybody thinks of him, that we should make it harder for citizens to vote. And I thought, wow. So somewhere about 47 years ago, somebody sitting in office, a majority of the men got together and said, we have disenfranchised Blacks, especially people of color, but particularly Blacks, were not allowed to vote, African Americans, and we're going to put the 24th Amendment in place. And now the mayor of Valdosta says, pretty much, we need to do away with the 24th Amendment, without actually saying that literally. That's what he's saying. Let's overlook the 24th Amendment. I thought his job was to uphold the Constitution as it was. The Constitution's in place, the 24th Amendment is in place, and we must adhere to the Constitution. By you making your comment, you basically say, I just want, like Donald Trump, who cares what the Constitution says? This is what I think ought to happen. Well, you're the mayor of a city that is supposed to uphold the laws of the city, the state, the county, and the federal government. So I don't feel safe that my mayor stands for every person of the city and every person of color, just by that statement alone.
Well, I think there's also, for me, you know, you're absolutely right. I asked concerned clergy, or I made a comment about what kind of state of mind would someone have to be to feel comfortable saying those things out loud and laughing about them. right? To me, it shows a lack of understanding, or it's either a lack of understanding about their impact, particularly again on a community that's predominantly African American, right? That again, I was elected to serve. Or it was, just intentionally hurtful, right? And we continue to monitor his show, and it was interesting because, last month was Black History Month, and his station had their little spots on, Black history heroes, and there were 5 people that they played over and over and over again, as if there's only been 5. It was such a kind of classic, we're going to do this because we want to sell cars for Cass Birch, who's going to do a spot on Black history. But to me, that was, and I haven't made a big beef out of that, and I probably shouldn't say it out loud, but it was so telling. You know what I mean? Because it's Rosa Parks, it's, Washington Carver, it's, it was James Earl Jones. It was the same cycle, and it was this obligatory thing versus, no, there's been more than 6 folks that have done amazing things, and Black history is American history. And white ignorance of that, I think, is a reflection of the value of Black lives, in our hearts and minds.
Yes, and it does speak to the mindset. Let's just go and call it what it is. It speaks to the mindset that I'm in office now, and I'm only going to focus on a few groups of people. It appears as if he was focusing on those people who placed him in office, and that he was appealing to the current state of where our country is. We had a president who openly, out of one side of his mouth, opposed white supremacy, and then out of the other side of his mouth, encouraged it. I have to keep pushing out there that he and Donald Trump are friends, and that's how he got to Valdosta. And listening to our mayor sounds just like we're listening to Donald Trump. Now, ironically, the N.A.A.C.P has taken the approach that we're suing Donald Trump. We have actually filed a lawsuit against him. Yeah. And it's moving forward, and it's taking flight. It's getting a lot of support. And we're also going after his pundits. So not just Donald Trump, but in each of the states, those pundits that have supported him and that take a page from his playbook, we're going after them as well.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we're saying the same things, because I think I think when he ran, he probably said what he thought people wanted to hear, right? Yeah. Politicians do that. But I think not only did what he say reflect that I can be in power and I don't even have to know about 55% of my community. And then when it's brought to his attention, right, and people try to talk with him about, like, what you're saying is really racist and borderline messed up. And not only that, it touches a nerve given the history of disenfranchisement and systematic racism in Georgia and the South, right? But so first, you felt comfortable enough saying that and laughing about it, but then when people try to talk with you about it, you wield power and ignore them, right? And then when they just get tired of trying to talk with you and they actually take action in one of the ways we plan to do with that ethics complaint, you kind of double down. It's, he is now the victim. He is the victim of of leftists trying to cancel culture and silence his free speech, which again reflects to me as a white person that I don't need to know what I did wrong. I'm not even curious. You know what I mean? Like, that's deep to me, that I'm not even curious, even after I'm informed that city employees are upset, and not only that, I'm going to keep going down the road I'm going. That's the power. I mean, does that make sense?
You hit the nail right on the head. You didn't even care to talk to us. You didn't care to oblige our complaint, to know our view. You simply, hey, that fake news is outbacking me. It's all, and listen to it because no one cares. No one cares about me. I'm the victim. And he never bothered to find out what actually we even complained about. As a matter of fact, in one of his videos, one of the audio commentaries on a radio show, and stated that we was ignorant, that we didn't know how to file a complaint, we filed it wrong, had to be instructed as to how to file.
Yeah.
It was like he basically called us without actually saying it.
Yeah, he did. He said that we had the instructions right in front of us, but we didn't do it right. Well, then,
Exactly.
the last part, well, and we're since we're both followers of Jesus, like the door is always open, right? The last part of it for me was the last kind of thing he did, or the next to the last thing, was just to give us that civics lessons that we evidently needed.
Yes.
And explain to us how this
we needed a civics lesson as well.
Yeah, like did you know you were in need of a civics lesson?
I think it's a lesson in sociology. He stated in